Christmas Eve, 1937. The snow fell in dense, soundless sheets, blanketing the narrow country roads leading to the manor I had recently inherited. The car's engine stuttered as I parked before the crumbling estate. Even in the muted moonlight, the house seemed impossibly large, its Gothic spires clawing at the sky. It was a lonely place for a lonely man. Grief clung to me like a shadow. My uncle's passing had left me the sole heir of this relic, a house I barely remembered visiting as a boy. The inheritance felt more like a curse than a gift, but the world outside held little for me anymore. Earlier that evening, I had resolved to attend a Christmas Eve vigil at the local church, if only to escape the suffocating emptiness of the manor. When I arrived, though, the church was deserted. Snow had piled against the locked doors, and the only sign of life was a single, brittle note nailed to the wood. It read, "Go home, light the hearth, let them in." The phrasing unsettled me, but I convinced myself it was some forgotten local tradition, the kind of cryptic folk custom that rural communities seem to cherish. With no other plan for the evening, I returned to the manor. Inside, I lit the hearth as the note suggested. The fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows across the room. It was then that I noticed a peculiar bulge beneath the threadbare rug near the fireplace. Kneeling, I peeled the fabric back to reveal a small iron chest, its surface etched with strange, spiraling symbols. Curiosity overcame me. The latch was rusted and yielded easily to my touch. Inside were old, yellowed papers scrawled with looping handwriting. Some kind of ritual, I assumed. The script was unfamiliar, but as I murmured a few of the words aloud, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The fire dimmed. A gust of icy wind swept through, though every window was shut. My breath fogged before me, and the shadows cast by the fire began to move unnaturally. Slowly, deliberately, they stretched and slithered, pooling together in the darkest corners of the room. I froze. My mind raced to explain the phenomenon, but nothing logical came to me. Then came the first whisper, a deep, guttural sound that was neither inside nor outside the room, but everywhere at once. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The first hours were bearable. The shadows, though unsettling, kept their distance, lingering at the edges of the room like half-forgotten memories. I convinced myself they were a trick of the firelight, a product of exhaustion and imagination. But as the night deepened, their presence became undeniable. The whispers grew louder, forming fragmented sentences in a language I could not place. My reflection in the frosted windows seemed delayed, almost watching me longer than it should have. Objects began to move, a candlestick tipping over, an old clock ticking despite being unwound. I told myself to leave, grab my coat, step out into the snow, and walk until the strange sensations were behind me. But something rooted me to the spot, a mix of dread and dark fascination. Around midnight, the whispers stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. The air pressed against my chest, thick and suffocating. I glanced at the scattered documents from the chest, now spread haphazardly across the floor. One symbol caught my eye, a jagged spiral with hooked ends etched repeatedly across the pages. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the upper floor. It sounded like furniture overturning, though I knew no one else was here. Against my better judgment, I grabbed the iron poker from the hearth and ascended the staircase. Each creak of the steps seemed to echo infinitely into the oppressive silence. The corridor above was dark, save for a faint glow spilling from the door to the study. I should have turned back, but something compelled me forward. I pushed the door open and froze. The shadows from downstairs were here, gathered in a writhing mass that seemed almost alive. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, coalescing into shapes that resembled gaunt figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. One turned to face me, and though it lacked a mouth, I felt its intent in my very soul. It raised a hand, a blackened claw, and pointed toward the scattered papers in my hands. It wanted something, and I had no choice but to obey. My fingers trembled as I sifted through the brittle papers, each fragment scrawled with looping symbols and faded words in a script I could neither read nor comprehend. The shadowed figure in the study stood motionless, yet its presence felt suffocating, its hollow gaze pinning me to the spot. The others, the shadows, began to close in. They emerged from the walls, pooling under door frames, stretching across the ceiling like spilled ink. The room darkened as the flickering glow of the hearth below dimmed further, leaving me in a cold, oppressive twilight. I flipped the pages desperately, searching for anything that resembled an instruction, a clue, something to appease them. My hands landed on a page where the jagged spiral appeared again, accompanied by a simple phrase written in English: "Bound in flesh, released by blood." My stomach churned as the meaning dawned on me. My uncle must have trapped these entities here decades ago, perhaps even longer, binding them through some arcane ritual involving a sacrifice. And now I had undone it. A low, guttural growl emanated from the largest figure, echoing like thunder in my skull. Its form swelled, towering above the others, as though feeding on my fear. My grip on the papers tightened, crumpling the fragile parchment. "I didn't mean to free you," I whispered, though my voice cracked with fear. I can put it back. I can fix this." The shadows moved as one, surging forward and then stopping just short of the protective circle of light cast by the single candle on the desk. Their retreat was immediate and deliberate, as though testing a boundary they could not cross. The journal. My uncle's journal. I remembered the faded leather-bound book I'd tossed aside earlier, thinking it unimportant. If my uncle had trapped them before, he must have left instructions. The shadows hissed as I stepped backward, and their predatory stare seemed to sharpen, as though they understood what I intended. With shaking hands, I bolted from the study and back into the parlor, where the journal lay discarded near the hearth. The air grew colder with every step. The shadows followed, moving faster now, their whispers becoming anguished screams. As I snatched the journal from the floor, one of the shadows lunged, a tendril of blackness coiling around my ankle. A sharp, icy pain seared through my leg as I kicked and stumbled back into the firelight. The tendril recoiled instantly, and the journal fell open to a page marked by a jagged tear. The words blurred as my panic mounted, but I made out fragments. Ritual circle, sacrifice, midnight. Midnight. I glanced at the clock. 1 minute to the hour. The shadows swirled at the edges of the room, their forms growing more distinct and grotesque with each passing second. The largest of them, its hollow eyes now glowing faintly, stood at the forefront, its clawed hand outstretched as if commanding the others. I read the instructions frantically. The ritual required a circle of salt, a burning flame, and an offering. Something irreplaceable, tied to the heart. My breath quickened as I fumbled to find the materials. A tin of salt sat on the mantelpiece, part of the haphazard clutter left by the manor's previous owner. I grabbed it, pouring a shaky line around myself and the hearth. The shadows surged forward as the circle began to take shape, but each time they reached the edge, they hissed and withdrew as though burned. With the circle complete, I turned my attention to the offering. What could I possibly sacrifice that was tied to my heart? My fingers instinctively reached for the chain around my neck. a tarnished silver locket containing the only photograph I had of my parents. I hesitated, memories flooding back of the few happy Christmases we'd shared before they were taken from me. The clock struck midnight. The shadows roared in unison, a cacophony of anger and hunger that shook the very walls of the manor. The largest figure stepped closer, testing the boundary of the salt. The flames in the hearth sputtered, threatening to go out entirely. Tears blurred my vision as I opened the locket. I stared at the photograph, my mother's soft smile and my father's steady gaze looking back at me before throwing it into the fire. The locket hissed as it melted, the flames flaring an unnatural blue. The reaction was immediate. The shadows shrieked, their forms distorting violently as the flames grew brighter, consuming the dark. The largest figure let out a deep, guttural scream that seemed to echo within my very bones. The air became a maelstrom, the shadows pulled inexorably toward the hearth. They clawed at the walls and floor, their forms unraveling into wisps of black smoke. The final shadow lingered, its hollow gaze meeting mine one last time, as though promising that this was far from over. Then it was gone. I collapsed to the floor, the room silent except for the crackling of the fire. The salt circle remained intact, the faint smell of ash and iron lingering in the air. The clock struck 12:30. Christmas Day had arrived, but the joy it promised felt hollow. Somewhere deep within me, I knew I had only delayed the inevitable. The manor was quiet, but not peaceful. The air still felt heavy, laden with a sense of something unresolved, as though the night itself had been scarred. I sat by the hearth, staring into the dying embers, my chest heaving from the ordeal. My hand drifted to where the locket had once hung around my neck, its absence a cruel, hollow weight. Despite the apparent victory, unease festered in my mind. I had completed the ritual, extinguished the shadows, and bound the spirits once more. Or so I thought. But the final moments lingered like a splinter. The way the largest spirit had paused, staring at me as it was dragged back into whatever abyss it had come from. It felt like a warning, not a surrender. I retrieved my uncle's journal, its cracked spine now smudged with soot and sweat. I flipped through its pages, hoping for reassurance, but instead, I found only dread. His final entries were erratic, rambling. He had detailed his own encounter with the spirits decades ago, describing how he had barely managed to trap them through the same ritual I had performed tonight. But there was one chilling difference. "They never truly leave," he had scrawled in jagged letters. "The binding weakens with time, and each invocation makes them stronger. Should they ever be freed again, they will not wait for permission to enter. They will come, relentless, ravenous, unstoppable." The words struck me like a hammer blow. My uncle had spent the remainder of his life barricaded within the manor, clinging to whatever charms and wards he believed could keep the spirits at bay. Yet here I was, sitting in the very same room where they had been unleashed. My efforts had not destroyed them. They were simply waiting. The house felt colder than ever. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, seemed infused with malice. Shadows still flickered at the edges of my vision, and though I told myself they were tricks of the mind, I couldn't help but feel watched. I made my decision quickly. I would leave. Leave the manor, the land, the cursed family legacy behind. I packed a single bag and lit one final candle, more for comfort than illumination. As I walked toward the front door, the floorboards groaned beneath my feet, their sound strangely deliberate, like footsteps trailing mine. Just as I reached the threshold, I froze. From somewhere deep within the manor came a low, resonant sound, a guttural whisper in the same indecipherable tongue I had heard before. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. I turned and looked back. The parlor was empty, the hearth cold, but something moved in the shadows at the far end of the hallway. A ripple, a shifting darkness that disappeared as quickly as it had come. The door slammed shut behind me as I stepped out into the snow. The house loomed in the distance as I trudged away, its spires bathed in pale moonlight. I didn't look back again, though the faint sensation of eyes watching me lingered with every step. Even now, miles away and years later, I cannot escape the memory of that night. The house stands empty, yet I still dream of it. The whispers, the shadows, the hollow eyes of the forgotten spirits. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear a faint tapping at my window, as if they are reminding me that they have not forgotten me. Not entirely.